Okay, so let's start. In today's seminar, Dilek Uslu'nun is going to be presenting to us her work on brief psychological interventions. Dilek is a PhD candidate at Koç University. In her undergraduate studies, she graduated from Özyeğin University, and now she works on workplace interventions, especially focusing on gender inequality and diversity and inclusion. So let me give the word to Dilek, and then after the presentation, if you have any questions, we'll also do a Q&A session. So Dilek.
Thank you so much for introducing me. I'm really glad to be here. So today I'm going to talk about one of my research that is about breaking the ultimate glass ceiling. So I don't know if you're familiar with the glass ceiling, but throughout the slides I'm going to be explaining them. Oops. Yeah. I also here put some of my other projects. And actually, in order to graduate from Koç, I had to come up with 3 independent papers, but they should be also, at some degree, should be related to each other. So first, I was actually investigating a meta-analysis study that was about the effectiveness of employee training programs. And at the end, we actually concluded that most of these employee trainings are actually not really effective. And actually, they are not also even evaluating the effectiveness of those. And then we come up with exploring the diversity interventions within the workplace to address gender inequality. It's a systematic review paper, and I'm still working on it. And after that, I had to come up with an experimental study, which I will be presenting today to you. That is about bridging the leadership gender gap. So before starting the slides, I want to show you this picture, actually this graph. And when we have a look at the 500 large companies in US, we are seeing that the total employees who are women and who are working in these companies is almost 45%. But when we are looking at the CEOs here, I'm not sure if you can see that, but when we are looking at the CEOs here, you are seeing that it's only 6 points. And I don't know if it is in line with your guesses, but it's clearly showing us that the gap is really, really big. And it's not okay. I mean, it's a problem within the gender inequality, and we should do something about it. So this was my main motivation. After I saw this number, I was very much in shock, and I decided, okay, I'm going to do something about it. I also want to show you this picture that is quite interesting to me. So when they were checking the Fortune 500 companies, on the right side, you are going to see the CEOs who are specifically named John. So these are the only, these are the males who are only called as John. But when we have a look at on the left, you are going to see all the women CEOs, and there is no specific name for them. They are just the whole CEOs that are women. And it's really sad that you can see it's almost the same number. So we can also experience how this gap is really, really big. And even though gender equality is actually told like getting better since we are 2020, but actually it's not really getting so much better. There's not so many changes. Actually, UN even reported that within the 100 years, we are not going to reach gender equality unless we do something about it. So we can call this as a leadership labyrinth, that women are still underrepresented within the management positions. And in this labyrinth, we are kind of lost. And it's actually not only the numbers. So I'm saying that, yeah, there is a really big leadership gender gap within the organizations, but at the same time, it doesn't really end after we really get into these leadership positions. So when we are in these positions, we are still facing with some prejudice in the workplace, and also we are experiencing some discriminatory behavior. For example, if we are showing the same behavior, the identical behavior, let's say we are given a task, and I actually perform this task in the same way with my counterpart, but who is a male. So when they are going to evaluate my performance, even though it's the same with my male colleague, I'm going to get some like less favorable evaluations just because of my gender. And this is not only about the evaluations, there's also a really big pay gap, right? I mean, even if we have the same background with the men, when we are assigning to a position, most of the time, there is this pay gap that men are making more money. And when you have a look at the percentages, actually, it's not really that big. But if you multiply them, for example, within the year, it's really making a lot. Here, I also put this picture. You are going to see some of the comments, some of the quotes. You might have heard them by yourself, by someone else, like you might have experienced them, or you might have just heard it from someone else experiencing. For example, here are some that I would like to read. I didn't think that you would want that much responsibility. So, for example, that is something that is often said to females who want to be in a leadership position. And then their colleagues are just saying, oh, I didn't think that you would actually want that. And that's the reason that I didn't really get you promoted, but instead I promoted someone else, probably who's a male. Or, for example, we need someone who is going to be tough. So they are basically associating that females cannot be tough, and therefore I'm not going to need you in this position, but I'm going to need a man. So there's a lot of discriminatory behavior and prejudice against females within the workplace, but today I'm going to specifically focus on leadership aspect. And within the leadership aspect, actually we can see that the distance is the same. So in order to get from a specific position to the leadership position, the distance that we should get is the same, right? But as you can see from this picture, I think it's really representing it very well, that the obstacles that we have along the way is really different, that females are really having so much obstacles. And when they are facing these obstacles, they can even have some reactions such as, but it's the same distance, why can't you run into that? And the reason is that obstacles, but most of the time, we are not even aware of the fact that we have different obstacles with the men. And in that term, actually, we can call these barriers, these obstacles and everything that we are facing through in order to get access to leadership positions. We can describe this with the phenomenon glass ceiling. So what is a glass ceiling and why actually we call it like glass ceiling? It's basically an invisible barrier. So why we are saying that it's an invisible barrier is because most of the time we are not really aware of all these circumstances that are preventing us from gaining access to these positions. It's mostly because of the fact that those things are so normalized for us. For example, we can think of women's responsibility within the norms in a traditional society. We can consider that women are, for example, expected to take care of the kids, right? So this is something that it's already embedded within our thinking pattern. And therefore, we are actually not even aware of the fact that that bias, that roles that we are attributed because of the society is actually preventing us. So because of this normalization, we have these invisible barriers that we are not really aware of. Or even if we are aware of, it's not so easy to do something about it. And in order to actually explain this, I'm going to talk about this role congruity theory. And in this theory, they are basically suggesting that the stereotypes associated, not maybe stereotypes, but like traits and stereotypes that are associated with females and with leaders, they are not really, there is a misfit between this. So therefore, we have this think manager and think male association. So why I'm saying this? When we have a look at the gender stereotypes, we can see here communal traits, for example, they're associated with being a female. So what are these characteristics? They are being affectionate, helpful, kind, agreeable, helping others. And I think the most important one here is taking directions well. So if you want to be a leader, you don't have to take directions well, right? I mean, you have to give some directions, you have to initiate some tasks. And here, all of these traits are very much in opposite with what we are expecting from a leader. But when we have a look at the traits that are agentic, that are associated with being a male, we are going to see that they are associated with traits such as confident, aggressive, ambitious, dominant, independent, and at the end it's also saying like initiating tasks, influencing others, and etc. So when we are checking what a leader looks like to us and what are the leadership stereotypes, they are very much in line with these agentic qualities that are attributed to males. And therefore, we have this association of think manager and think male. For example, when we are talking about leaders, have you ever heard someone saying like a man leader? We never heard of this, but if the leader is female, then they are specifically saying a female leader. So why is that? It's because it's still a big surprise that, you know, there's a female leader, because leadership is already associated with being male. Here I actually have a really interesting example. So I'm also working as a researcher at Koçkam Gender Studies Center, and we had this project, I think, 2 years ago, that was supported by UNESCO, and we were giving some leadership training to women who are in the workplace. And I mean, all of these women were already at some place within their career, so they were not like, they didn't just start their career, they already have some senior degrees, I think. And they were like consciously in that training program in order to learn about some leadership skills. And in our first class, I think I had like 25 participants or something like that. And I asked them to draw a leader. And I just wanted to see like how they are thinking of being a leader, you know, what comes to their mind when I say draw something that represents the leader to you. And among 25 of those, I think only 2 or 3 of these women actually draw a female as a leader. But all the others actually draw a male figure, and actually with an angry face and everything. So even those who are there to get some skills and to be aware of these biases against them within the leadership positions, they already have their own bias. So when I'm saying that think manager, think male is an association bias that we're having, I'm not only saying that men have this bias, also women have this bias. Like actually, if we have a look at the leadership literature, we are going to see that there are also new leadership styles that are emerging. For example, transformational leadership style, it is also found as the most effective one, and actually females are more, you know, using that style when they're in a leadership position. But still, when we say leader, we are thinking of a traditional leadership. And that's why we still have this association that leaders are males. Yeah, here I also want to show you some examples. There are quotes that are actually publicly made. For example, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom had this quote, UK Prime Minister Theresa May is working in a man-sized job. I mean, how could someone actually say this publicly? And one of the biggest problems here is that he didn't really get so much reactions against the sexist remark. Another thing is from Trump. He has many of these, but I wanted to put this one. So he's saying, if Hillary Clinton can't satisfy her husband, what makes her think that she can satisfy America? So here he's assigning the role to Hillary Clinton, to a female, as if her first duty is to satisfy her husband. But if it was Bill Clinton, for instance, if he was in the elections with Trump, I don't think no one could really say, if Bill Clinton can't satisfy his wife, what makes him think that he can satisfy America, right? So these two quotes actually can be defined as very hostile sexism in a way. But that's not only it. So on the other hand, we have some other form of the sexist remarks. And I'm going to talk about Sandberg here. Maybe you're familiar with her. She's the CEO of Facebook. And she wrote this famous book that is called Lean In. So she's actually, well, she has some great ideas. For example, she's saying in the future there won't be female leaders, but there will be only leaders. In her own way, she's trying to motivate females to take more part within the leadership positions. But she's missing 2 points here. First of all, not everyone actually has to like really have the motivation to be in a leadership position. I'm not only thinking about the females, but not everyone wants to be a leader, right? So she's kind of missing that point. And I think the most problematic part here is that she's saying, I believe that if more women lean in, we can change the power structure of our world. So what is the problem here? She's basically, in a way, putting the blame on women and saying that they are not really leaning in. But the problem here is that they are not being able to lean in. It's not that, you know, the ones who wants to be in the leadership positions, there's just so many obstacles. There's this glass ceiling, and it's not really that easy to lean in. So instead of really saying, you know, these things, I think we should really focus on how to handle this, right? And how to prevent this obstacles. How can we help women in terms of this? My focus in here was actually intervening women in terms of this bias thinking and the stereotyped rat. But most of the organizations actually are focusing on changing the biases and prejudice of other people. So they're implementing this diversity training programs, but as I told you, they are not really working, and they are not actually even like being evaluated, because most of these organizations are just, in a way, doing this for marketing, and they are not really, you know, investigating if the workplace is actually, you know, that if they really succeeded reducing some bias, and if the workplace is really, you know, getting into direction to be in the gender equality. So they are just, you know, implementing these interventions, and when they are doing it, they have this strategy and they have this thing in their mind that they're thinking there's no harm in trying. But what they are missing is that those interventions can also backfire. For example, most of them are actually about, you know, raising awareness within the sexism and within this leadership gender gap, for example. And because they're implementing these interventions to both of the females and males, they are missing some specific points. So for example, if females are facing with this discrimination in order to be aware of it, it is very possible that, you know, it can backfire, and they might even feel a bit, you know, worse about themselves, and the stereotype threat could actually increase. On the other hand, when they are showing stuff to, you know, males, for example, if you have a look at this commercial, it's saying this is an ad for men, hire more women in leadership roles. So men can have two responses to this. There are some people who can say, oh, this is a really nice one, and, you know, they can be supporting this. But on the other hand, and this is actually the most response that we get from the organizations, especially from white, straight, cisgender males, and they are just saying that why they are putting this commercial of my face, why they are implementing these interventions, are they, you know, accusing me with something like being sexist or something like that. And because being sexist is now a really, really big word in this egalitarian society, or so-called egalitarian society, they are not really happy with these interventions to be implemented to them. And therefore, it's backfiring in a different way. And they are showing more hostile behavior towards women, for example, or they are having like more biases towards them. So in my other paper that I mentioned you with the literature review, we are trying to find a way to improve this interventions and try to really, you know, not getting the backfiring effects, but really, you know, getting some benefits. And most of the thing, most of the problematic thing here is that most of these interventions are not really based on a theory. So that's something that we are criticizing in our paper a lot, and I hope we are going to come up with some future direction soon, but it's still ongoing research. Okay, so talking about this, now I'm going to talk about what I'm doing in this research that is different from these diversity interventions. So we decided, why not changing our perspective? So instead of focusing on reducing the bias of other people, we changed our perspective and we shifted our focus to how these stereotyped people are influenced by these stereotypes. So how women are, for example, are influenced by the fact that they have this stereotype that there's a mismatch between being a leader and being a female. I mean, this also has an effect on me, right? So we are focusing on this within this paper. So what is stereotyped rat? So yeah, this is basically a stereotyped rat, like how we are really influenced by the stereotypes. But in order to define it in a more detailed way, we can say that it refers to a fear that my own behavior can be perceived through the stereotypes that are associated with my social group. And in this category is the gender. And also, I have a fear that I might confirm this stereotype. And because of this feeling of or experiencing the stereotype threat, many research studies actually found that this stereotype threat can lead to lowered expectations of success. So I'm thinking that I'm not going to be successful anyway, so why should I try, for instance? Or it can also lead to lower organizational and professional identification. So I might not really feel like I'm belonging to my company that I'm working, or even to my position. And it can even lead to more stuff, like quitting the job, for instance. It can also lead to reduced ambition and motivation. So it has many consequences. And actually, when we have a look at these consequences as a whole, as within the, within a bigger picture, we can see that this stereotype threat is actually also helping maintaining this gender inequality within the leadership position. So it's helping within the gender gap in the leadership positions. So what can we do to intervene this, and at least from a different perspective, to some degree, help this gender gap to be getting a little bit, less and less? So I'm going to talk about brief social psychological interventions in here. As you can see it from the name, it's very brief interventions actually. I think it's taking like 5 to 6 minutes or something. And it's grounded on the stereotype threat theory. And it's basically focusing on changing the perceptions, thoughts, and feelings and beliefs of the stereotyped individuals. So it's focusing on the subjective experiences of those individuals who are in the stereotype domain. These interventions are mostly used in the educational setting. And actually, this is the first study which takes these brief social psychological interventions and adopted them within the organizational setting. So it was very interesting for us to test if these interventions are also working in organizations. And with the current study, we examined only 2 of these interventions, but there's also a lot more than these. I think in total, there might be 8 to 9 interventions that can be classified within this intervention category. So we only examined the values affirmation and role modeling interventions. And the reason that we actually focused on these 2 interventions is because within the educational setting, those interventions are the ones that are used as the most. And they also provided with long-term effects, and the effect sizes were really large actually, which is surprising given the fact that these interventions are actually very small, right? I mean, very short, and you wouldn't really expect a large effect size, but it was the result. And it's not only one study. There are so many studies that are conducted within the educational setting. For example, they are focused on increasing math scores of females within the university or high school. Or they are focused on increasing the GPAs for, ethnic minorities, for instance. And they looked very promising. So we conducted 2 independent studies. One of them was a student sample. We hired participants from Koç University, and they were all females. And after this, we also conducted a second study, which is actually employee sample, female employees again. Before describing the studies, I'm also going to talk a bit about the interventions. So values affirmation intervention is based on self-affirmation theory. And what the self-affirmation theory is suggesting? It's basically saying that when we are feeling threatened by something that might be related with, maintaining our self-integrity, self-worth, in order to handle this, we can think of other things that are important to us, but they should be unrelated to the threat. So in order to explain this in a more detailed way, the mechanism actually starts with, these 3 ways. The first one is that within the values affirmation intervention, we first get this enhancement of self-resources. So we are being aware of what are my self-resources, my other self-resources. And then we are trying to change the focus from the threat itself into a more expansive view of the self. So what is this expansive view of the self? It's basically including other self-resources that I was just reminded of. And then as a last step, the mechanism is like helping distinguishing between the self and the threat. So this threat might be just a part of me, but it's not really describing who I am. So we are looking at in a bigger perspective. And this is actually also, I recently gained some interest in acceptance and commitment therapy within the workplace. And now I'm actually realizing it's very much in line with this. And it's also proven as effective. So you're going to see from the results that values affirmation intervention has actually really big effects, large effects. That is very surprising. Within this intervention, we were just basically giving a paper to the participants. And in this paper, there are some values. For example, it can be like being successful, or religion, relationship with the family, you know, all other kind of things. And we were asking participants to pick one of these values that is most important to them. And if none of these values are important to them, of course, they could come up with something else. And we were asking them to write something about this value. It can be a memory, it can be an experience, or it can just basically, you know, a speech that describes why this value is important to them. And we wanted them to write to like 5 to 6 minutes. That was basically the intervention. As I told you, it's very brief. Intervention, role modeling intervention, it's basically saying that if I'm going to see someone who is in the same group with me, in a stereotype group, and if I'm going to see that someone has succeeded within that domain, then it's going to give me some motivation. It's going to, you know, give me some hope that I can also handle with the stereotype threat, that I can also do this. So the mechanism is actually very basic in here. And the procedure of the role modeling intervention was basically giving a letter to the participants that describes a successful in-group member. The important thing here is that they should be related to this individual. So if, for example, the individual who wrote this letter is someone that they could be perceiving as an exception, then this role modeling intervention can even backfire, because then they are going to have the idea that, okay, but she's an exception and I'm not going to be like her. So I'm still, you know, I can still feel that stereotype threat. And the role modeling interventions was actually found to be really effective in terms of reducing the achievement gap, especially within the STEM fields. So it's science, technology, engineering, and math. So in our studies, we implemented these two interventions, values affirmation and role modeling intervention. Now I'm going to talk about the first study. It was obviously a random assignment, and we had female university students. In total, we had 183 participants that were equally distributed within the conditions. When we asked participants if they had a leadership experience, because we were thinking that they might have a, you know, leadership experience might have a moderating effect here. So we asked this also, and we were lucky because almost 52% of these participants have reported that they have leadership experience. So the people who didn't have any leadership experience was kind of similar to that number. That's why we could also test its moderating effect. We get the procedures from Hoyt's study. She's conducting many studies in leadership. And well, we had some, okay, first I'm going to describe how the study takes place. So we conducted data in our lab. Participants come to the lab, and first, of course, we give them the consent form, and then we deliver the interventions. And after the interventions, the real experiment has started. And in this experiment, they were given a memo. And in this memo, it was saying that you're in a managerial position, you are a leader, and you have a group of 3 male colleagues that you are leading. And we also told them that we are going to now give you 2 CVs of 2 candidates that, you know, we might possibly hire. And we asked the participants to evaluate these 2 CVs And later, after evaluating the series, we asked them to give a presentation to their male colleagues. So how did we do this? We actually put a VR glass on them. And when they have this, VR glass put on, they saw 3 male colleagues in an office in order to, make them feel the stereotyped rat a little bit more. And then we told them that I'm going to leave the room, and they have 3 minutes to give the presentation. And it was only recording their voice, so we didn't really had a video recording or anything like that. And after the 3 minutes was done, I came to the room and I told them, okay, your presentation has finished. And then we gave the questionnaires. So this was the leadership task that we adopted from Hoyt study. And when we were evaluating the leadership task performance, me and I think 3 of the other undergrad students, we listened all these recordings and we evaluated them based on the presentation structure, the speech quality, how well they were giving orders, the delegation skills, and also we had a look at the overall leadership skill. After that, we also had some other questionnaires, like perceived task performance. So we were basically asking, how well do you think you perform in this task? Leadership aspirations, we ask it in a way like, if there will be another experiment, would you like to be in a leadership role? So we were basically checking if they have motivation to be in a leadership role again. We also give a questionnaire about the leadership self-efficacy, but actually it was a really big mistake because self-efficacy is like a trait and we shouldn't have really expected it to be changed via giving an intervention. So we should have actually used that as a moderator, I think. But it's too late now. I think we are going to do this in our next study. So yeah, that was basically the experiment. And then when we analyzed the results, we only had effectiveness from these interventions on 2 of the outcomes. One of them was the leadership task score and the other one was the leadership aspiration. So as expected, we didn't get any effect for the leadership self-efficacy, but we also didn't get any effect from the perceived task performance. So when we have a look at the leadership task score, you're going to see that on the right here, those are the participants who have leadership experience before. And those are the participants who have no leadership experience. And when we have a look at the groups, we are going to see that in terms of leadership task performance, participants who have no leadership experience actually benefited from the values affirmation intervention. The significance was moderate, the difference. And there was no difference between the role modeling condition and the control condition. So I think this is really important because in terms of the diversity research, it's mostly a fact that we might be able to change the participants' knowledge and awareness, but there is a really, really big attitude and behavior gap. But in that context, we are seeing that with using the values affirmation intervention, we are actually changing their behavior. So they're actually performing better, which is really promising. But when we have a look at the participants who have previous leadership experience, we are seeing that the difference between these groups were not significant at all. So we are seeing that they are not really benefiting from either of the interventions. We are still trying to, make sense of this. So if you have any ideas, please feel free to share with me at the end of the presentation. But we are thinking that because those participants who have, no leadership experience, because they didn't really experience the toxic workplace environment, it might be a little bit easier for them to, benefit from these interventions. But on the other hand, those people who have been in a leadership position, and by leadership position, I mean like student clubs, because the leadership experience, I mean that student clubs or like organizing an event or something like that, because they weren't really in this toxic environments, they couldn't really benefit from such a short intervention. But I think one of the limitations of this study, I'm going to talk about it at the end, is that we actually implemented these interventions only in one time. So within the educational setting, they were actually implementing these interventions throughout the semester. And that's why they actually had a long-term effect. So their GPA was like gradually increasing. But within this experiment, it was a big limitation to us that we are hopefully going to address in our next study. So that was our guess in this. There's another. Evet hocam, I also think so. And within the leadership aspirations, here, for example, it's also a bit interesting. Again, participants who have no leadership experience benefited from the intervention. That was the role modeling. So within the role modeling intervention, they were probably motivated if they already have the motivations to be in a leadership positions, but if they were really afraid of this due to stereotyped rat, for instance, or there can be also other like, you know, things, of course, it's not only the stereotyped rat. But people who were in the role modeling conditions, so who could actually see that, you know, someone else could do this, then they have the aspirations because they also believe that they could also do this. So this is also actually in line with our expectations. We were expecting that role modeling intervention would work with this one, and the values affirmation would work with the leadership task score. But when we have a look at the participants who were never in a leadership position, we are seeing that participants who are in the control position is actually, you know, having like higher leadership aspiration scores. So in here, the difference was, I think, medium to large again. But here also, it's like medium to large, which is something we are also trying to make sense of. Because, I mean, why? It might be again related with the toxic environment if, you know, if there was no difference between the interventions. But this is a bit different, that, you know, like it's a bit difficult to really interpret the results because it's the control group. So yeah, we are still trying to make sense out of it. But within the study one, we actually saw that, okay, brief social psychological interventions might also work for the organizational setting. But our participant group was, of course, students. So we also decided, okay, let's conduct another study in which we have like actual working sample. So we recruited 153 female employees from an online platform that is called Prolific. And in Prolific, the participants were mostly British and also European, some of them. Participants' age range from 20 to 65, so it was a bit diverse in terms of age. And most of them reported that they have been working more than 10 years. But when we were doing the analysis, we realized that this working time actually didn't have any effect of the, you know, effectiveness of the interventions. And because of the fact that 94% of the participants had said that, you know, they had no leadership experience, we couldn't really have the chance to also test for its moderating role within the employee sample. We had the same procedures, but because this was an online study, we had to adjust our leadership task because it wasn't really, you know, possible to get recording through, you know, online. We didn't think that the quality of the data would be great if we would do that. So we had to adopt a different one. And we decided that, okay, we are going to ask participants to write an email to their 3 male colleagues. But it turns out that it wasn't really effective to test the leadership task. First of all, we didn't get like any, you know, effectiveness of either of the interventions on this task. And second, also writing email didn't really give us such a qualified data. And also I think the fact that, you know, most of those individuals are actually working more than 10 years, they are really, really, you know, familiar with writing emails to many people. So it wasn't really, you know, conditioning them with a stereotyped rat. So in our next study, hopefully we are going to find some other leadership tasks that can be implemented online. So the other questionnaires were similar in the same month, but we also added 2 other scales. One of them was the group identification with the gendering group. So we were basically checking how much they are feeling like they belong to their gender group. And we wanted to test if there is a moderating effect of this, which we didn't find any, by the way. And we also had another scale that is recently developed by Zeynep Aycan. It's about worries about leadership. So in their paper, they're basically suggesting some people might just, don't want to be in a leadership position. Well, they internally actually would maybe wanna, but because of this worries about leadership position, they're actually saying no to the leadership roles. So we also wanted to check if within these interventions, we can also help people handle these worries, at least to some degree. Okay, so when we have a look at the results here, as I told you, we couldn't get anything from the leadership task score, so there was nothing with that, but we're hopefully going to find something in our next study. But with the leadership aspirations, that was actually in line with our previous study, that participants who were in the role modeling condition, they actually had higher aspirations comparing to values affirmation and control group. The effect was again medium size. With the perceived task performance, actually the effect size was very small, but I still put it here. So participants in the intervention conditions, they thought that they performed a bit better comparing to control group. In here, by the way, one of the things that we were surprised is we thought that if the gender identification score was higher among the participants, we thought that probably they would actually benefit more from the role modeling intervention, especially in terms of leadership aspirations, but we didn't find really any effect on this. And with the worries about leadership one, we found that participants who are in the role modeling condition and the values affirmation condition, they had less worries about leadership after implementation of the interventions, but again, it was very small. However, we think that this is promising, and we think that maybe throughout the implementation of this intervention in more than one time, we might get into somewhere. So this was the result of the study. And basically, brief social psychological interventions were not adapted to organizational settings before. So this is actually the first study that is confirming we might benefit from those interventions within the organizational setting, and maybe in the future we can also, benefit from those in order to bridge the leadership gender gap. Findings have also practical significance in terms of highlighting that it's very important when we are delivering these interventions. So if I'm already in this toxic environment, it might take a bit more, time, or it might be a bit more difficult to really benefit from these interventions. And in here, actually, we are suggesting, as you're familiar with, like within the most universities now, they are offering leadership classes. But in these leadership classes, they are mostly talking about leadership style and like leadership skills and etc. So we are thinking that, when the students are already in the university, before they are really in the workplace, we think that in these leadership classes, these 5 to 6 minutes interventions might really, really work if implemented within the classes in terms of really, opening the way for minorities. And I'm not only talking about the female leaders here. I mean, I'm also talking about, for instance, ethnic minorities and, other groups that are stereotyped. I also talk about the leadership task. If you have any suggestions, please, I'm really in need of it. And other thing is that, there was also a limitation with the measurement time. So we are not really able to test the long-term effect, as I told you. So all these points, we hope that we are going to be addressing in our next study. Thank you, and I can get the questions now.
Thank you, Dilek, for that interesting presentation. If anyone has questions, okay.
Yes, thanks a lot. It was really good to hear such a topic happening actually in real world as an intervention. But although I'm not so familiar with brief interventions, and also I'm not an expert on gender issues at work, still I have some questions because I'm also interested in inclusive leadership style. So kind of related to diversity, as you know. So I actually also questioned the leadership task, not just for the working group, but also for the student group. So did you select on, of course, you said that it is the, just a second. There's a pardon, temizlik saati. evi süpürüyor da o yüzden. Okay. Okay, where was I? Leadership task. So yeah. I actually questioned whether having just a presentation or scanning some CVs could be listed as the leadership task, because if I would be a leader, I would be delegating such a task to my subordinates, in fact. So you said that it was the actually procedure by Hoyt, right? Yeah. So I'm sure there's a theoretical background behind it, but still I wondered how you can actually discriminate or define it as a leadership task.
I actually had the same problems. The reason that we get the Hoyt task is because we really couldn't find any other task that could really measure the leadership skills. But one of the things that actually comes to my mind when I'm checking this leadership task is that, so most of these students also have performance anxiety, right? Like most of us in our undergrad years are not really so much willing to give a presentation. So what I'm thinking is that this might not be related with some leadership stereotyped rat, that it might be related with anxiety to give a presentation, because most of the students were also telling me, oh my God, I'm going to give a presentation, I'm so nervous now. So I also think that it might have some limitations in terms of, evaluating the leadership task skills. So actually maybe, not only for the online one, but we should maybe really develop another leadership task to look at their scores. But within Hoyt's study, it was actually proved as really qualifying for the leadership skills. So I'm also a bit confused there.
Yeah, I'm sure you already checked for all the possible alternatives, and as you know, I also know Seminer very well. I'm sure how she works actually, but still maybe you can check some real life exercises that are used in these ACDCs or in order to develop or select leaders. Maybe you can find anything, especially for online, because they conduct all these assessments online right now. So maybe you can find such a tool and combining them with some competencies which are globally accepted as leadership competencies, then maybe it might work. Another question, the interventions about people who are experienced for 10 years. So 10 years is really a long duration. As I said, I don't know how the interventions work. So I'm not sure about the progress or process behind it, but I wondered how would be the results actually if the employees were newcomers maybe or having an experience less than 1 year, because they would be probably more open to be intervened regarding especially the leadership skills.
I also actually was wondering about it, but I think the participants who have more than 10 years experience was like 39% of them. And the rest was kind of distributed equally. So when we checked for it, we couldn't really find any effects based on this experience, year of experience. But it was also an idea for us.
Why did you recruit European people?
We didn't want to get into mechanical Turk because I had really bad experiences with it.
I'm sorry, Müjde.
There were also some Europeans, but mostly, people.
Is it the Europeans? Well, how should I call them? Okay. What else? So I wondered why, because you used Koç University students as your, I'm sure you also control its effect, but I wonder why did you select to have British women?
It's to get a better data.
Okay. By the way, I'm very supportive regarding the leadership classes in universities, and even not just leadership, but also it would be much more great, I think, if it is combined with the culture also, both national and organizational culture, because they are two concepts which are very highly correlated with each other and almost inseparable. So therefore, it will be really great if also this class is somehow enriched with such interventions at the just beginning of their career. It will be great, I think. Thanks a lot, Dilek.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Any other questions?
I have a suggestion. Maybe we should have classes on how to deal with leaders, so that like when you're a worker, like you can deal with different leadership styles and stuff, because like not everybody is going to be a leader, right?
Yeah.
So some are going to work for other people. So like I think it would benefit more people if we had classes on like how to deal with leaders.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea actually. I'm gonna consider this.
Nasıl bir liderin suyuna gidilir dersi. Lidere göre şerbet dersi.
Actually, like lately, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept, but there's this concept for toxic leadership. And especially, I think in Turkey, most of the leaders can be categorized on this category. So I think it's a really, really good idea if we also teach people how to deal with those toxic leaders.
Yes, but since I'm a positive organizational behaviorist, I'm not considered these toxic leaders. Of course, I consider, I'm not ignoring them, but I would prefer to focus on some potentials of people. Positive potentials of people. By the way, you said that all those interventions are not working, actually. I wondered about the he for she movement. Do you have anything, do you know anything about it, whether it really works or not? Because it is a huge movement and big companies are actually supporting it. So I wondered, do you have any ideas or maybe heard something about it?
I don't have any like scientific based ideas about their effectiveness, but I have some personal ideas on that. I think it's more about like corporates really, you know, promoting themselves. I mean,
like employer branding.
Yeah, in a way. I'm kind of seeing it like that. But I mean, of course, it might have some positive effects on some people. But I don't think it really has a like scientific, empirical base within the intervention work.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
I have another thing to say.
Yeah, sure.
Yani haftalardır hep konumun dışı seminerlere katılıyorum. Please yani let me talk. Yes. At the beginning, you mentioned the characteristics which has been actually role model congruency, like benevolent, helpful, affirmative, etc. Actually, now we have so many different leadership styles like benevolent, inclusive leaders, which already actually supposed to have such characteristics. So actually, now the picture is changing, and somehow we have to also explain people who are working in such toxic environments, let's say, that these characteristics are right now the ones who are which were actually worth to have for leaders. So they make the difference rather than being just agile or just powerful, risk-taking, etc.
Yeah, actually also those kind of leadership styles are also found to be, I think, more effective than the traditional leadership style. But because we are like so embedded with the idea that being a leader should be in a way traditional, even though there is this change, I think like we have the association of this still, and that's the problem, even though of course there is also a change.
Yes, exactly. Maybe the leadership classes should also focus on these new modern contemporary styles of leadership rather than charismatic or even transformation is right now an old-fashioned one. So,
yeah, that's true.
So very good. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you for the question.
My next question.
Any other questions?
I have.
All right.
I think I have.
Sorry.
Me, Müjde.
Okay, Müjde, go ahead.
Hi, Dilek. It was a really interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was going to ask about this issue with like when you said something about opening the way to minorities, and one thing that they do when you give them role models is they subtype it instead of subgroup it. So they say things like, okay, yeah, Obama was president and he was black, let's say for black people in America, but he's one off, or this guy is really successful, but he's one off, he's not like me. But if they see a lot of these role models, like they start subgrouping them and they say, okay, these are the successful black people and these are the people who are criminal black people, etc. If you do an intervention for those disadvantaged groups, how would you avoid this subtyping issue? Because this stops them from kind of identifying with the role models.
Yeah, that's also one of the limitations within the interventions that I'm working. One of the strategies that actually we adopted is that we are trying to make this, role model to be like someone that they can be achieved to. Like, for example, if it's someone that is famous and if they would see that person as an exception, that can even backfire, as you say. So we are trying to just like show an ordinary people. For example, within these letters, we just get a letter from a female student that is also said that she's from Koç. I mean, of course, we wrote the letter ourselves, but we just try to make that person look like them. So if they could relate to that person, I think it could really, have an effect. But there could be other strategies, of course, that I'm going to think of this. But that was one of them that also came to our mind.
Thank you. It was a good talk.
Sure. Yes.
Any questions? No. Okay, so I have a question.
Okay.
So as far as I could understand, like the first two experiments show that like when you do the value affirmation, which is about like telling people kind of they are okay, like you have your values and those are fine, like you're a complete human being with your stuff, right? So if you do that, people actually change their behavior, right? So, but if you show them a role model, right? So this is a person like you, and like she's a leader, so you can be that also. And when you do that, people's belief changes, like in whether they can be in a leadership position and whether, right? So that difference, right? That difference is something to consider, I think. Why? Because, right? So if you change people's beliefs about themselves, right? They can change their behavior, but if you just make them believe something like that they can achieve, it's just their belief that changes, not their actions, right? Okay. So I think that's something to consider. And I want to ask about, like you talked about the gender pay gap, which is a very, very hot issue and like a minefield. So I'm not going to discuss it, but are there any other factors that are contributing to this gender pay gap?
I think one of the things is basically the association that females have their priority as, taking care of the kids and having like household activities. So when people are actually hiring females to their organizations, they don't want to invest so much to females because they are thinking that at some point they are going to leave or they are going to have other priorities. So I think they are investing more to the males and they are trying to satisfy the male workers a bit more because they're already thinking that, for example, she can be, she can get pregnant. So why I should, for example, give her a budget to get a training, or why I should pay her more than the male colleague if she's going to leave me at the end. I think that can be something. But also they have the tendency to, see the performance difference. So they're also, in a way, thinking that men actually deserve more comparing to women, which is something that I really don't like to say, but that's also a belief, I think. What can be the other thing? Yeah, I think those are it. And
yeah, I would maybe add something. I agree with Dilek, and maybe I will be repeating, but usually their starting pay was much higher than women because they like to attract them more. This is why they offer more to men candidates. And since the beginning starts with a gap, so during the whole way, they cannot actually fill this gap, unfortunately, with all these promotions and increases. So because of the baselines, starting baselines would be different, and it goes and goes. And sometimes with the promotions especially, it gets much more bigger. Because of the concerns that I already mentioned, they want to attract men more.
Unfortunately. But also, I mean, there's this, gender segregation. It's also depending based on the occupations, I think. For instance, we might see that people would like to hire more women in the schools, let's say, for example, because being a teacher is kind of seem like a, female thing. But again, when we have a look at the managers of that school, we are going to see males who are also getting a lot more money. So yeah, I think it's like a paradox that, yeah. So yeah, that was my answer.
You also talked about the disproportionate amounts of males in leadership positions, and like you showed that pyramid where, like, as you go up the hierarchy, kind of the proportion of women even decreases more. So my question is, like, how does it compare to other types of jobs? Like, not just like leadership positions, but like whether there are some jobs that have disproportionate amounts of women or men, again, like whether
Yeah, there is, of course, unfortunately, within the STEM field. So it's science, technology, engineering, and math. There's a really big gap in terms of gender. So mostly we see males there and not females. And within the social sciences, for example, and like being in a teaching job, or like, for instance, being a nurse, like there are so many stereotypes based on how this, gender segregation, like occupational segregation happens. Or what else? Yeah, I think it's mostly STEM field. Actually, women are now getting more access to different educational backgrounds. Like, it's not super weird now, for example, if a female wants to be an engineer. But because of the stereotyped threats and everything, they are still feeling like they're experiencing more obstacles. And most of the time, there's a really high dropout rate, for instance. And that's why this gender segregation within the workplace is still continuing, I think. So yeah, jobs also have gender.
You also showed an ad, like where it said, like,
hire more women
for companies that have like more women in their like executive boards, and and they had like 15% more revenue.
Yeah,
so is that a correlation or a causation?
I don't know how to comment on this. Well, I don't know, but for example, I just want to talk about something like there's also this phenomenon called glass cliff, for instance. So it's basically saying that if a company is in a really bad situation, it can be a finance crisis or, something else. They're actually, like, women are actually selected more comparing to males because actually, they are handling this better. So if you can, in a way, connect this, we can also see that, I don't know, like women can actually, like within a causation, can actually help companies in a maybe better way, but they are not really given the opportunities unless there is a crisis. So I think this ad also might be coming from the statistics from this crisis moment. But I'm not sure. But I don't think we should actually say a causation, because I don't think gender actually is really important factor here. I mean, it's the individuals. And I think we should also stop seeing gender as such a binary, because the more that we have this binary distinction between the, genders, we are just going to associate these stereotypes more and more, and we are never really going to get within the, gender equality. And when I say gender equality, it's not only equality for women, right? I mean, it's for all genders. Sorry, I got a little bit out of your question, but yeah. But yeah, so maybe it's a correlation.
All right. So, any questions? Like, I feel like I'm talking too much.
I don't have any question, but I had a comment on that. I really hated it because it was saying we are all worth it. So it's like an advertising of women. I really hated that words or statement.
Yeah.
It was horrible. And using the red lipstick is something else, of course.
Yeah, I agree. It's already sexist. I mean, the commercial itself is sexist.
Yes, exactly.
I have no comment or question, but I just want to thank, because this was a very interesting talk and it's beyond my field, so I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Maybe next time we can also talk about this glass cliff. It is also a highly interesting topic, by the way.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Like I don't have any other questions. If anyone does, I feel like okay. So this is your last chance to ask a question. This is the last call for a question.
Sen sor. Ben soru soramıyorum çünkü burada bu var.
Piraye, benim şapkamı gördün mü arkada?
Evet, işte gördün mü? O zaman kendinize iyi bakın.
Çok teşekkürler. Tekrar.
Rica ederim.